Well, good evening and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Henry Fortunato, Director of Public Affairs. You know, from time to time over the past few years, it has been our pleasure to work with the folks from the Nelson-Atkins. The idea is that basically they come to the library to present talks about exhibits at the museum. Seems like a very good trade to me. Tonight we continue that tradition with the first of several presentations focused on the Nelson's latest blockbuster exhibit, Inventing the Modern World, Decorative Arts at World's Fairs, 1851 to 1939. This show is an absolutely stunning collection of nearly 200 artifacts that, in aggregate, provide an excellent sense of the wonder and the excitement that World's Fairs provoked in an era before television and the internet. Still to come in this series is a talk by historian Robert Rydell of Montana State University, who is perhaps the world's leading expert on the history of World's Fairs. And he'll be speaking about innovations at World's Fairs and the world they made on Wednesday, June 6th at the Central Library. Then just a few days later, on Saturday, June 9th at the Nelson, there's an event, a free event, called Innovation Showcase, which will celebrate the 21st century advancements taking place right here in Kansas City. And then in August, on a date yet to be determined, in a presentation we haven't yet quite put together. How's that for hedging? We're looking at some kind of program that will explore the question of what would we do here in Kansas City if we had a World's Fair? Sometime in August, before the exhibit closes. Anyway, while we haven't quite gotten our act together, the Nelson has certainly done their part. Inventing the Modern World is done and is great, and the person primarily responsible for this is Catherine Futter, the Helen, Jane, and R. Hugh Pat Ullman Curator of Decorative Arts. It says that right there, too. She earned her bachelor's degree from Duke University in Medieval and Renaissance Studies, then went on to Yale to pick up a master's and a PhD in the history of art. So, she knows what she's talking about. She specializes in American and European decorative arts from 1850 to the present, which, in combination with her personal fascination with World's Fairs, makes her just about the perfect person to be our host and our guide to this exhibit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Catherine Futter.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you all for being here. It was very exciting. We thought we'd do something a little different rather than me just talking about the exhibition, but rather give you a sense of that it takes, in this case, a city to put together an exhibition. So we're going to give you a behind-the-scenes look, glimpses at what it took to put together this exhibition. So we're going to start with me, but then we're going to move to Amber Mills, who has been with the museum actually for 8 years, and she's been in the exhibition design for about 5 years. She's done many different projects, from small ones to very large ones. She and I have worked together many times. And then we'll have Amanda Ramirez, who's also been at the museum for a number of years, and you may have seen her excellent work in the Egyptian and Ancient Gallery reinstallation. And she and I have worked together, but I've never worked together with both of them, so that was a new, an interesting thing for all of us to work with. And finally, you're going to hear from Emily Black, who's been at the museum a number of years, working as an interpretive planner and also working with the different educational programs. So we're going to give you some of the sense, but just remember, we are 4 people out of a team of at least 100 at the museum who worked on this project. So we are just spokespeople. So when you go into the exhibition, and I hope many of you have, actually, how many have been to the exhibition? Oh, good, okay. You can sense maybe, I've had a lot of people who've asked me, how long, Catherine, have you been working on this? And thank you so much for bringing it, and I know it took a lot of work. So somehow we've conveyed that, which wasn't really the intention. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the exhibition. I've been working on this exhibition for about 15 years. I brought it to the Nelson-Atkins. I've only been at the Nelson-Atkins for 10, so obviously I brought it from somewhere else. And it is an exhibition that in the last 4 years has really moved very quickly forward, and that is because we partnered with the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They're the co-organizers, and they will be the second venue for the exhibition. The exhibition then travels from Pittsburgh and it goes to New Orleans, to the New Orleans Museum of Art. And finally, in the fall of 2013, it moves to Charlotte, North Carolina and the Mint Museum, which has its own special challenges, but I'll maybe talk a little bit about that later on. So it has about 200 objects, from huge pieces of furniture to small pieces of jewelry, and we'll see some of those images. And our time period that we're looking at is between 1851, which was the first World's Fair. It was held in London. It was organized by a man named Henry Cole, who was an art critic and also really interested in the junction or really unifying art with industry. That was a very major topic in the 1840s. And he partnered with Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's consort, who was also very interested in the promotion of industry, especially British industry, even though he originally was from Saxe-Coburg. So our end date is 1939, and maybe you think, why 1939? Well, although World's Fairs are still occurring today, there will be one this year in Yeosu, South Korea, and there was one in 2010 in Shanghai. After 1939, I think partially because of the Second World War, although I would even argue this started before, and I definitely recommend reading some of Robert Rydell's book because he really is an authority about the history of World's Fairs, especially American fairs. After 1939, World's Fairs become not about the products, which is what we are focusing on, the products that the manufacturers use to promote their most innovative, their most technically superior objects, but the exhibitions, the World's Fairs, really become about ideas. And even in 1939 in New York, the exhibition was called The World of Tomorrow. In 1933, A Century of Progress, but it still was about objects, and that's what our focus is. So that's why we bookended at 1851 to 1939. Why World's Fairs was the topic. The reason is, and I will show you a couple of objects that sort of drove this, is because, as I said, these were the great places where manufacturers showed their greatest innovation, their technical expertise, and the latest styles and fashions. And so we started noticing that this was a trend when we found great objects that they were shown at World's Fair. So it seemed an ideal place to, or an ideal idea, that's a double something or other, to have an exhibition about these, because it was about great objects, things that really would dazzle you. The other very important thing about World's Fairs, and they are the same today, is it brought the world together. So it was the greatest meeting place of ideas and people. And so we really wanted to sort of explore that as well. In order to sort of think about this idea, our key word became innovation. And that meant innovation in new technological processes, new materials, but also innovation in style. And because of this cross-cultural dialogue that happened where literally in 1851, the world came together under one roof, and that meant that there was this great exchange of ideas from different cultures. And so that was another innovation. World's Fairs are also all about national pride and international competition. So objects also convey that, have great meaning where they may tell narratives that support national pride, or they may have symbols that show national identity. And finally, they were always about progress. They were always very optimistic. Even if wars were going along, competing countries literally might be in stands next to each other or parts of exhibitions. So they were very, very, very hopeful in their outlook. And I didn't mention historicism because I think it also relates to looking back into national pride. And I have a little theory, which I'm now going to share with all of you, which is that in order to advance a new process, you might take a more traditional style. But in order to advance a new style, you might take traditional materials. So when you go to the exhibition, you might try that out and see if it works. It holds for me. It doesn't always work, but one of my theories. So one of the things that we do at the museum for every exhibition and often for programs, we create what we call key messages. And as I said, this exhibition had about 100 people working on it, and so we really needed something or some things that we could hang our hats on that wouldn't distract us from a sort of focused exhibition. So these are our key messages. Number one was to recreate an atmosphere of desire and consumption, because that was all the World's Fairs were about, which was a better educated consumer was a better consumer. And I can tell you we succeeded in goal number one during our installation, because when things weren't happening to some of us, we'd be sitting together and all we talked about is what we wanted in our houses. So I knew number one was already conquered and we hadn't even opened the exhibition yet. And number two was to instill a sense of nostalgia or historic wonder that really connected with our audiences. And I can tell you again, before the exhibition opened, I would tell people I was working on an exhibition on World's Fairs, and they would say, I went to one, or they'd say, my grandfather went to one, or immediately they started making a personal connection to the World's Fairs. So we thought that was very important, and also this feeling of nostalgia. And so I know our designers will also talk about that. But we also wanted to highlight what was innovative in these works of art, and also what is innovative today. So we've also used that as one of our criteria in programming in some of our campus-wide activities. And finally, making that connection to what we still live with today, whether it's a fair kind of atmosphere, and the closest that I can come to is the car shows, seem to be, there aren't, where they show innovation of a new concept car, but they're the things that you can kick tires and slam doors. So recreating that so that when you're in the exhibition, you see objects that are literally still being made today or look like things that you may either own or have inspired things that you own or see for sale. So where did this all start for me? When I was very small, my father had a client. I grew up in New York City, so home of the 1964 New York World's Fair. My father had a client in the West Virginia Pavilion, and that's what this is here, who owned a glass-blowing business. So we went out there quite often, and to be honest with you, I don't remember very much at all. I remember the little glass horses and things like that, but I do remember my Sinclair dinosaur because I still have it. And I still can identify that smell of extruded plastic. In 1967, my mother took my sister and me to Expo 67. We drove up with a friend of hers, and I remember a couple of things, very important things, or actually I remember sort of three things. One was the geodesic dome, because it was so cool, by Buckminster Fuller, that you see here. The other was that I got my first architectural memory, and this is Habitat, which was designed by Moshe Safdie, of course, the architect of the Performing Arts Center, and I had the pleasure a couple of months ago to take Moshe Safdie through the block building at the Nelson-Atkins, and I said to him, you were my first architectural memory. You made me think about apartment living, and I was living in an apartment. He seemed sort of impressed, but he was 30 years old when he did this, and it's still standing, and it's still viable, and it's still a way of living. So it was it was innovative in the way people lived. So the third thing that I really remember is we lost my sister. And it was quite dramatic, but it turned out she just put her hand in some other woman's hand and walked away. I don't know what the woman thought, but they were very efficient, and we went to Lost and Found, and she was happily chewing gum, which we were not allowed to chew at home. And so, you could see maybe this whole thing is trauma, and I needed to do this exhibition to work through this. That being said, so World's Fairs were these, as I said, these great global events that brought people together. We think of them often from different innovations, such as the Eiffel Tower in Paris. You probably all know that the Eiffel Tower, when it was built in 1889, was reviled. The French hated it, thought it was ugly because it doesn't look like a building. It looks like a lighthouse at best. It looks like a piece of construction. It looks unfinished. They hated it, and it's still standing. So obviously they got over that. And it's now sort of the icon of Paris, and they light it up. And they actually lit it up in 1889, they had it all lit up. So, and of course, the Ferris wheel in the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, another innovation. And just, I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but as the museum, when we were talking about, we wanted something that really sort of recreated the feeling of nostalgia, also showed innovation. We thought, we need a Ferris wheel on the lawn. And if you want to put a child through college, buy a Ferris wheel, because they are so expensive to rent, and they're also really tiny. And so we decided that was not a good use of our money, and so we moved off the idea of a Ferris wheel. The architecture at World's Fairs was temporary. These fairs lasted about 6 to 9 months. Sometimes they were so popular, like Chicago in 1933 and New York in 1964, that they would close and then they would reopen the following season, sometimes with the same displays, but sometimes with new ones or changed out ones. And again, this feeling of bringing the world together. This is a view of the interior of the Crystal Palace, the building of 1851. So as I mentioned, I've been working on this a long time, and this really started coming together when I was in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and we were considering the purchase of this pair of vases, and we thought, wow, they're really great. I think they were dated 1867, so we knew when they were made, had just the name of a maker. I started doing research, and I found out that this man worked on, his studio was on the street in Paris, which was famous for its ceramics, and I started doing more research. And then I found out the greatest innovation in ceramics in 1867 was chromolithography on ceramics. And I thought, I never thought about that. And I started reading the reports from the Paris Exposition Universelle, and it really celebrated the fact that these ceramics were so groundbreaking, because now what looks like it's hand painted is actually machine produced. And so this is a technique of using printing, chromolithography, a lithograph, printing instead of with inks, with glazes, and then applying that design to a vase. So it means that more people can own these because more of them can be made less expensively. But it also showed us that it was looking at late 18th century styles. And again, that's sort of historicism. Remember I said this is what we can try out, my little idea, my theory, which is older style, new technique. So sort of that grounding. So that made us start thinking about these things are really interesting that were shown at World's Fairs. Another object that recently came into the collection at the Carnegie Museum of Art is the famous piano, which if you've been to the exhibition you know is not made out of wood. It has a wood core, but it's made out of paper mache. So painted to look like it's lacquered. So it has paint and varnish. And then, and this is something that's important when you're in the exhibition, when you see it, you'll see the gallery light is very static. But if you were in this was shown also in the same fair of 1867, the gallery light there would either been natural light, so imagine clouds going over it, or may have been even gas light, in which case all of this decoration here and all along here would be sparkling in the flickering gaslight. Then these panels here are reverse painting on glass, meaning the back of the glass is painted. They also have little applied glass beads on them. So they too are going to catch the light and sparkle. And finally, to give it, because it needs some more sparkle, don't you think? Here, this what looks silver is actually aluminum foil, a new material from the 1860s. Aluminum was lightweight, it's malleable, and unlike silver, it's not going to tarnish. So all of these things, again, are a manufacturer putting out their very most innovative styles and materials. So this was the set, and also this is important because the scale of these objects, and these vases are not quite this big, but they're really big vases. The scale were, and if you look at the photograph, there's a photograph, and I know one of the designers will show you an image of it, the blow up of what these stands looked like. Again, this is all about promotion. This is all trying to sell products. The biggest objects are going to stand out, and they need to make the biggest impact, visual impact, so that you're drawn to them to find out more about them and actually to want them. This piano was made by Jennings and Bettridge, a Birmingham firm in England, and would have been the centerpiece of their stand. At the same time, they're selling papier-mâché boxes and chairs and tables, so much smaller objects that you would have been able to purchase and take home. So how do we go about sort of finding all these objects? Well, did a lot of international travel. From January to July in 2009 alone, with the co-curator Jason Bush, and I'll show you a picture of him in a second, he and I did 5 trips to Europe. And it was the most amazing experience because we went into storerooms in Budapest, Prague, Zagreb, Stockholm, Copenhagen, all the places that you see here, to try to find these objects, and also to talk to the curators and directors to see whether they would lend them to our exhibition. Because this exhibition is 2 years long, and it means that museums and collectors are lending their very most precious objects to us for that length of time. So we had to make sure that they were willing to do it before we even asked them. And sometimes they said no, but often they said yes. So here's our domestic travel. Obviously, we went to New York a lot. So here's, this is Jason and me, captures the fact that we're exhausted. I can tell you, if you do, I had a joke, which was, it was either 6 hours in one museum, 6 museums, or 2 towns and 4 museums every day, 7 days a week. So, and of course you have to buy all the catalogs, so you have to carry all the catalogs. So our suitcases would weigh 65 pounds, not a joke. We would be running from trains, 4 trains, not from trains. So this gives you some of our images of us traveling around and looking at things, sort of all the different kinds of places. I was the note taker. I was sometimes also the backdrop for objects. Jason told a very funny story about how I often wore this black dress, so sometimes he would tell me to turn around. So I could be the object would be photographed against my back. So here are my notebooks. And he took literally thousands and thousands of images of everything we saw. Actually, this is a table that's in the exhibition that he took this is about a quarter of what he took. Now, do we need all these pictures? Yes, if you're writing catalog entries or essays, yes, you do. What was that image that I have forgotten? So it was invaluable, all our different information. So here are some of the objects that elaborate on those themes. So this is an object that's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and for me brings together that new technology in that the colors that we see here, these purples and pinks, this is a Japanese vase. They were not available to the Japanese potters until a German chemist named Gottfried Wagner went to Arita and brought chemical glaze technology with him. And that means different minerals and different chemicals that could be used for glazing. And this revolutionized also the enamel industry as well. And because of that, now the Japanese had a new palette that they could then put on objects that would then be appeal to a European and American market. So again, they're catering to their market because they're trying to sell goods. We see the samurai here, very nationalistic symbols, even were in 1876, that's when this was purchased from the Philadelphia Centennial. So we're seeing very nationalistic symbols, and yet in a really, really dense environment. That would, although maybe having samurai would be appealing to a Japanese audience, that density of pattern would have seemed sort of repulsive to them. Like, why do all of that? Then nationalism comes later into the century as well. This is a brooch, which is by Tiffany & Company, that incorporates Montana sapphires and diamonds. So by using Montana sapphires, it's showing that the United States has gem quality minerals that can be used in jewelry instead of having to go to the Far East or Europe or whatever. So it's showing we have the goods. So again, that nationalism comes through the materials as well. How many people love this object and this is what they want to take home? Okay. So this is where, when we'd have these discussions while we were doing the installation, what do you want to take home? And what was really funny was sometimes people would say, I love this thing. I'd say, you like it better than the screen? No. The screen was the number one thing, and I've had lots of people tell me, if it's missing, it's at my house. I'm thinking, it better not be missing. So it is from the Allentown Art Museum in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It is their prize jewel, and they've lent it for 2 years, which is a big deal for them. And it is a Japanese embroidered screen. It is not a photograph, it is not a painting, it's all hand embroidery. It took 8 months to create by 3 people. It is a tour de force of embroidery. It was shown at the 1915 Panama Pacific Fair in San Francisco and was called out as one of the great objects of the fair. But when you visit it, stay a respectful distance. And then we get to 20th century design. Again, it was very important for me, for the exhibition, not just show you sort of the old things, but bring it so it became relevant to the way we live today. And we found actually, after the object came here, these pieces are actually by the same company, the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, but we found out that these cylinders had a etched company name on them, and I did some research and I found out that these cylinders were actually used in gas pumps. So it is art and industry are married together, exactly what Henry Cole and Prince Albert wanted for their exhibition. So how did we bring these all together? They were shipments from all over Europe and all over the United States. All these little blue dots show you where all the shipments came in. And our registrar did so much work. We had to negotiate with lenders. Every object, as I say, sort of has its medical sheet. Every object may have light restrictions, handling, don't want them to tarnish while they're here. They can't have fluctuations in humidity. So every one of the pieces of artwork has a record, and we have to abide by that in order to meet the restrictions of the lenders, because we are entrusted with their care for 2 years. And that's very important to the museum, that we return them in exactly the same condition that they left their museum. So, for instance, the vase and the pedestal, both by the Union Porcelain Works of Brooklyn, New York, both shown at the Philadelphia Centennial of 1876, 2 different museums. One museum, which is the Smithsonian, says it's okay to put the vase on the pedestal. The High Museum says it's not going on the pedestal. We're not comfortable with that. So how do we work together with them to make sure that the objects are safe, they look beautiful? We didn't really want to put them in a big plexi box, so we worked with them to make sure that the objects were safe. This collar here is made out of Mexican fire opals. They have humidity and light level restrictions, so we had to meet those. And so it meant every work of art in the same case with it had to be treated the same way. And then here are the tapestries. There are 2 tapestries which came from the Czech Republic. It was sort of on again, off again, off, off, off. I met with the director of the Decorative Arts Museum in Prague, and I said to her, these are really important works of art. We really want them in the exhibition. What can you do? And she said, there is a restriction. The Czech government is not letting artwork out of the country. There's nothing we can do. Catherine, I really would like to help you, but I don't think there's anything we can do. And I said, really? Because it's really, really important that they come. We need big textiles. They're just so innovative, even though they're showing these traditional crafts and they show in a traditional weave, but we really need them. And so she said, okay, we're going to try. So they went to their Ministry of Culture, and we went to the State Department. And we got what is immunity from seizure. So while these objects are here, they cannot be seized. And that's what the Czech government was worried about, that if objects are out, they can be seized by governments. So we managed to get that. But it was, the amount of work we all did to make this happen was quite remarkable. Sometimes things don't come. So this is when people ask me, what didn't come that you're really sad about? And this is the one that kind of broke my heart, but I got over it. This is a vase that's about 30 inches tall, is a platinum ground. It was shown at the Philadelphia 1876 fair. It's all about Scandinavian, especially Swedish nationalism. So it all has all these scenes of Vikings and things like that. Oh my gosh, what a great object. Not only that, Jason and I had a $100 taxi ride from one side of Stockholm to the other, which included me calling and saying, we're going to be late because we're stuck in traffic. And I'm saying, but I first say to the woman, do you speak English? And she says, no, I speak Italian. So I shifted to Italian and managed to convince her to stay a little bit. And then we finally got there. We had 7 minutes. I stood there and stalled her in Italian. Jason ran around and took another 3,000 photographs. And then I got to run around really quickly. And then we got back in the taxi. 7 minutes, $100 taxi ride. And the object can't come because they wouldn't lend it for more than 2 venues. And we just thought, we can't afford to send this back. However, then we start thinking about it. Was it telling the story that no other object tells in the exhibition? And fortunately, that story was told by the Viking Punch Bowl, which was shown at the Chicago 1893 fair, which is made out of iron and inlaid with silver, so actually an ancient technique. But this whole nationalism story, especially the interest in the Vikings, was already told. So I got over my tears. Yeah. This just gives you sort of a glimpse of the sort of shipments that had to come in. It all had to be, we had a lot of couriers. Those are people who accompany the art to make sure it's all handled well. It was all scheduled and staggered and staged so it all would be safe and we would be able to accomplish it. So I'm now going to turn it over to Amber.
Good evening. My name is Amber, and this is Amanda, and we were both exhibition designers for this show. And if you're wondering, what does an exhibition designer do? I'm about to show you. So, to give you an idea of what we do for planning the exhibition, we usually start out with a space assessment, and that's the upper image. So it's basically a plan view, an aerial view of the gallery, and we throw in all the artwork scaled and see how much space that we really have for the exhibition. And we noticed pretty early on that we had way too many objects, so we had to scale down on that. After we go through the space assessment, then we work really closely with Catherine and figure out the groupings of the objects, what objects should be together because of process or visually they look good together or they're trying to tell a story. And so this is like an abstracted version of seeing the exhibition and the order in which they should go through. So once we have that established, then we can go back into the layout and actually put the objects in the order that they need to go, really looking at walls, the rhythm of the space, the amount of casework that's needed. We also use 2D elevations, and that really helps us see the proportion of the objects with the space that they're going into and the casework. Sometimes elevations aren't enough to really understand the space. So then we go and we do renderings. So these are a handful of those. This really helps understand how objects, groups of objects will interact with the platforms and the casework and the walls to get a better understanding and to make the whole team have a better understanding. So the color palette, which is one of my favorite things to work on, we went through many different colors, many different paint samples, and looking at interiors from 1851 to 1939, we really wanted to make the space feel as you're walking through it that you're going through time. And so using some of those colors. So it starts out more primary, heavy, very intense colors, and then as you go through the Art Nouveau, it becomes more muted, more purples, greens, and then the modern section, which becomes a little more grays, whites with really bold colors. And these are glimpses of those colors used in the different parts of the gallery. So you'll see the more like primary in the historic area down to the modern where it's very clean lines, light colors with bold. Another way that we help the visitor transition into the different spaces is through casework. So I'm going to give that over to Amanda.
So the casework development and all the furniture actually in the exhibition space is sort of developed concurrently with the sort of layouts and plannings of the objects and the object relationships that happen. This exhibition presented this amazing opportunity to build some custom pieces to highlight the sort of experience of going to a fair, and not only a fair, but several fairs, all of the fairs between 1851 and 1933. The custom work sort of began, you can see here, the process starts with a lot of brainstorming and sketches. This is just a handful, but there are hundreds of embarrassing sketches running around our office that we use to try to share ideas with our staff, ideas with educators, with curatorial, everyone in the museum to sort of understand what hits a bell, what rings a bell in terms of what gets people excited about World's Fairs, what highlights an exhibit object in the perfect way. These are just a few of the sketches, but the sketches also point back to much of the research that we did. You can see here a couple of sort of historical documents from various fair installations. And the fairs themselves were actually the beginning of exhibition design. The whole discipline sort of started maybe a little bit with window design and storefronts, but also with these fairs that the kind of discipline took off, and the idea that you can sell an object with how you present it, or you could tell a story with how you present an object, all sort of kind of came from these fairs themselves. Once we began to settle on a few variations of casework styles from different eras represented with objects in the exhibition, we started to prototype them. We ran through about 15 drawings of different furniture that was kind of from classic to completely modern. As a result, we had both some real winners that were very hard to construct, as well as some that were very simple, and we had some that we just plain weren't crazy about. So this sort of white model stage allows us to learn a lot. In addition, seeing them in reality instead of just the drawings like you see below allowed us to consider how the objects would interface with the casework and make sure we weren't overpowering the objects with the presentation, and that we were supporting the stories that Catherine was trying to tell, as well as the themes that all of the objects coming together present. The design of the casework also informs sort of then the larger design of the exhibition. You have here a couple of shots of a vignette designed for the Art Deco, Art Moderne section of the exhibition. And when we translate the casework to other parts of the furniture, the larger families sort of come together with the visual language or style that's similar. In order to kind of make these reality, that the pictures you see at the bottom, as Amber mentioned, a lot of them are completely rendered in CAD software beforehand. The purpose of this is to sort of really understand the object relationships. And here, in the World's Fair exhibition, all of these objects are so spectacular they could have easily stood on their own. However, there wasn't enough space for everything to stand on its own, as well as there were so many stories to tell by combining the objects. There are about 5 vignettes in the exhibition similar to this one, and they allow visitors to sort of explore these amazing relationships between these spectacular objects. Objects large and small, objects that are metal, objects that are fiber. You can see not only the variety then, but also how deeply the sort of movements or aesthetic intentions of artists or different cultures or different nations sort of really speak to each other at these various fairs through various media. And you can kind of get a sense of even what it would be like to live with these objects or live in this time periods where when all of these different types of objects are combined. Ordinarily, you might see a show that's more like all about metalwork, all about furniture, but we had this awesome ability to sort of combine and show the relationships about how those different media are talking together. These are a couple of details of the 3 casework designs that sort of fed that larger language or the architecture of the space. You can see the first one, of course, being much more revival or historicist, fits the early work primarily in the exhibition. heavy decorative moldings, raised panels, very classical proportions and features. But that just wasn't going to do it through the entire space. And not only would it not speak to objects that are later in the exhibit, the objects that presented in this type of casework are really featured better because the sort of visual relationship or style relationship makes sense, and it provides an extra contextual hint to the visitors. We're hoping that when you immediately walk into the space and all of this old casework is there with sort of, or the casework that pays homage to these older styles, that we can sort of begin a sense of visitors stepping back in time. As you move into the late 1800s, early 1900s, the casework begins to simplify and you get styles like Art Nouveau primarily that we wanted to kind of tip our hats to. So the casework becomes much more simple. The sort of bases at the bottom become flared to speak to the more organic nature of the objects themselves. And by the time you get to the end of the exhibition, especially Art Deco and the modernist areas, the casework is completely simplified. And in fact, the geometry becomes stark, very not only modern, but almost radical in some of the ways that the objects in the fairs were. Each of those cases then doesn't suit every object. So just to give you a sense of sort of how this technical drawings work out, there were 82, basically, major pieces of furniture in the exhibition, and for each of them there's about 5 pages of drawing. They're meticulously constructed to meet those medical sheets, those object needs for every specific object, from humidity levels to conservation grade materials. And we sort of keep track of them in these large matrix type sheets. The quantity of this casework not only makes a World's Fair-like show an anomaly because of its great content and sort of the once-in-a-lifetime ability to get all of these objects in the same room, but the complexity of bringing all of this specific furniture together and all of this casework into one place is often prohibited. So you don't see these kinds of really large object-heavy shows traveling very often. And not only was the quantity a challenge, but it also provided a really great way for some of us to have fun. We were able to, for instance, make one of the largest cases we've ever made for a temporary exhibition. It's been nicknamed the Mobi Case. It's over 15 feet long, and it is basically a study. It allows the presentation of many vase-like forms to be compared, and it's really a highlight in sort of this throwback tradition to exhibition cases like you would have seen in the Crystal Palace or those early exhibitions around 1851. So with the challenge of quantity also came many of these great opportunities. And we hope that they provide a really great sense of what it was like to visit an object at a fair while you're here in Kansas City. So all of those case components, all of those 82 cases made out of dozens of parts and pieces each were presented or were put together primarily in Kansas City, but parts as far away as Chicago, by many different types of vendors. There were plastic vendors, metal workers, woodworkers of the highest quality, and then it relies heavily on our fabrications team once all of these pieces and parts land to sort of resurrect the show from parts in place. And this is like it was a fantastic moment to see the exhibition space so full of casework that we didn't quite know where the objects were going to fit. But slowly but surely, as everything came together, it did indeed allow for all of the great objects to come in place after the hard work of a very large fabrication team. The last thing we do after the cases are sort of assembled and put together are begin to work through all of the graphic and didactic presentations that sort of enliven the space, not only by creating context or creating awareness of the show, showing the brand, but also telling the stories, showing the pictures of the past, and relating them to the time, the present time, and the objects that are currently shown. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
My name is Emily Black, and I was one of the educators that worked on this excellent exhibition. And I'm just curious, is there anyone in the room that's been to a World's Fair? Look at all those hands. Can someone yell out a favorite memory? Anyone? Maybe food? Yeah. There's a microphone if you'd like to. If anyone would like to. If not, you're going to hear the memory of my mom, so. Well, as you guys are thinking, when I was first learning about this exhibition and talking to it with my family, my mom said, you know, all I remember is really the Belgian waffles and being around big groups. But it's really about the idea of visitor experience that I was able to collaborate with Catherine and Amber and Amanda, as well as a whole team of staff at the Nelson of creating and resurrecting this idea of what it would be like to visit a World's Fair. And as you can imagine, it can encompass a lot, but it also really focuses on the idea of awe and wonderment and being able to discover and learn new and exciting things. So that was a challenge of education, and so we included a variety of activities within the galleries and throughout the campus of the museum to create that sense of wonder. So we really wanted to create memories. As you can see, we want everyone to feel special, and as I kind of convey some of the activities that we decided to do, I think you'll kind of get that sense of feeling special and creating memories. So in their in-gallery activities, we're going to start within the exhibition, which highlights most of our exhibition activities, but they do pervade throughout the whole museum and on campus. But this was actually one of the first exhibitions that we conceived of having museum guides or volunteers within the exhibition to spark conversations. There's someone that you can ask questions if you come on a Thursday or Friday evening or on the weekends. So you have kind of your personal guide, which is pretty cool. And then this is just an image of two visitors engaging with our jewelry interactive. This is part of our late 19th century jewelry case, where you can see yourself in a mirror and try on the beautiful jewelry that you've seen. So we really created the idea of consumption that Catherine talked about, because once you see these things, you're like, I gotta try this on. So you can now do that through these mirrors. So the first 3D imagery debuted with the Stereoscope at the 1851 World's Fair in London. And the Viewmaster brought 3D to the 20th century in the 1939 fair in New York. And so there's a station when you enter the exhibition, kind of towards the middle, where you can actually kind of look through the eyes of a World's Fair visitor and actually look through one of these nostalgic technologies of a stereoscope and a Viewmaster. And I grew up with a Viewmaster, so it was like, whoa, what are these stereoscopes? So I think it's really fun to see visitors of all ages, sharing and having even grandparents showing their kids how to use it. Something unique to this exhibition is that, as you can imagine, with 200 objects, each object has a really unique story. But we did choose 5 objects to have an art card. And on the great cabinets and displays that Amber and Amanda designed, there are 5 that have a holder either on it or nearby it that has an art card. And you can think of that similar to a baseball card, where there's a great image on the front. On the reverse side, there's a little bit of extra information. I kind of call it like really just secret information or just some really fun information. But there's also this really kind of weird black and white square code that you see there. And that actually activates a computer kiosk in the center of the exhibition. But what's really cool is that you can keep this set of cards and actually place it within this really beautiful brochure that you should pick up, because sometimes people don't, so you should pick it up. But it actually is a folder, and you can put these cards in your folder, take it home, and you can activate these cards when you go home, which I'll explain. So in the center of the exhibition, so if you've explored kind of this old nostalgic 3D technology, now you have a chance to really explore these objects using really exciting new technology called augmented reality. So once you've picked up these art cards, you see the black and white code, you can come to a kiosk. There I am you can see me holding the card. And before you, the web camera will recognize the black and white image, and then a virtual object will appear. So you can see that you can see really tiny, I'm holding the piano, but what's really great is you can turn it and tilt it. You can see behind the piano, which the security guards won't let you go behind and see, for good reasons, you know. There's a beautiful dragonfly lamp, and you can actually see on top of it and below it. So this really enables you to engage with these objects in a really cool way. And this is what you can take home and go on our website. And if you have a webcam on your computer, you can still engage with these objects. Additionally, on this kiosk, there are some really great animations of how the objects were made. So you can see how the dragonfly lamp was made with the beautiful stained glass. You can see the papier-mâché or the bentwood lawn chair. So those are just some exciting things that you should look for when you come and visit if you haven't already. And I don't know about you, but whenever I have a really great experience, I just want to, I always send a postcard to a family or a friend. We want to instill that kind of sense of nostalgia also with our visitors. So at the very end of the exhibition, we have postcards that you can sign and send a message to your friend about what an amazing time you had. There's also a prompt that says, what would you showcase if Kansas City hosted the World's Fair, which I know will kind of inform a program later in this series. But what's really cool is you can put it in a mailbox and we'll send it for you. So people have really taken advantage of that already. So that wraps up what's happening within the galleries. But now we're going to move within the museum to the Creative Cafe, which is on the plaza level in the Black Building. This is our cafe that has fair vending foods, including coffee. There's also, again, these vertical touchscreen computer kiosks. There's these really comfy chairs. I went up there and I saw a couple of people napping, which I totally like. I mean, museum exhaustion. There's also a really great place where you can, if you didn't want to send a postcard, you can post it on our great little visitor wall. But the centerpiece of the Creative Cafe is that we're really drawing from the nostalgia of World's Fair posters. So you can have a choice of picking of one of four, or you can do all of them for all I care, of mock-ups and then, templates of World's Fair poster designs, and you can take a picture of your face and put it in one of the figures and send it to a friend. So, and you can even add your own little tagline, like living the avant-garde life, and little kids have done it, and it's a really great souvenir because, I mean, if we all been to a World's Fair, we always get a souvenir, so we wanted to have that. In addition, keeping with what if Kansas City hosted a World's Fair, and also tying back to the Stereoscope cards, we created reproductions of these stereo cards, but one side is Blinx, so you can actually draw an invention or a pavilion design, whatever you'd like, and put it on our magnetic map of Kansas City. So here there's this growing idea of what Kansas City would look like if a World's Fair was there. And so we've talked about what's happening within the museum, but let's talk about what's going outside the museum. Have you guys noticed the thing that has been the architecture that's been growing on our lawn? Have you been inside it, anyone? It's kind of, I see a couple hands. Well, you should definitely stop by because it's always open. When we think back to World's Fairs, a World's Fair has to have a pavilion, and that was something that Catherine really believed in, and even though we couldn't get the Ferris wheel, we thought, well, what could we do to get a pavilion on the lawn? And we invited architects and designers to submit designs, and we accepted a proposal from Generator Studio and artist Tim Gurkowski for the Sun Pavilion, which is now on our lawn. And the centerpiece of this pavilion, I mean, it's not only embodies the idea of innovation, new technology, discovery, wonderment, questions, because it's like, what is that? It embodies a lot of questions to me. So many things that not only ties with the exhibition, but World's Fairs in general, but it also has these great ways to engage with visitors. And each shipping container, it's made of 3 containers. Each one is programmed with a different way to engage visitors. one of which asks, in each container, it also asks a different question. So you can see there's this question over here says, what innovation would you create for the future? And people can write on chalkboard with chalk and on the wall and everywhere, they're really writing everywhere, what innovation they would create for the future. And the middle container, which is air conditioned, and it's all generated by solar energy, and this whole temporary pavilion was made with sustainable materials. That middle pavilion really talks about why it's innovative. Using sustainable materials is a very innovative thing, using solar technology, so it really impacts that idea. And in addition, there's a hand crank, so you can crank and move as fast as you can, and you can see how much, through an infographic, how much energy you generated and how that compares to the pavilion, how it compares to, could the energy that you generated power a cell phone? So that's kind of fun. And then the last container is how can we create innovative environments together? So we've asked the community to donate furniture, and local artists kind of disassemble the furniture and create a new art form in the form of an assemblage. So that's the image on your far right. So there are obviously so many things that you can do inside the museum related to the exhibition as well as outside, so there's no reason that you should not come, and I look forward to seeing you.
I know we're out of time, but Henry already talked about this, but there is an innovation showcase at the museum on June 9th. And so the Generator Studio and some of the companies that worked on the Sun Pavilion will be there. Mind Drive, which is at-risk high school students that have put together a green car, an electric car. They are unveiling their latest car at the museum. MRI Global will talk about sustainable energy, and we'll have demonstrations. And they also support Paseo High School in robotics. So we will also have sort of hands-on demonstrations and things like that on June 9th. But I think I want to open it up to questions if there are any.
Yeah, because, we never run out of time. We just run low on it. So,
Good.
so we're running low on it, but Catherine, thanks very much.